So one of the things that happened was that there were people from political parties, from the government, from Islamophobic networks that all tried to tell a new narrative, which is that everybody who speaks about Islamophobia is basically a proponent of political Islam. So the claim was those from the Muslim Brotherhood speak about Islamophobia. So hence, this meant that basically I was not a scholar, not a political scientist, but rather I should be treated as somebody who belongs to an Islamist organization. And I think that was crucial in the way how it was possible to then really be affected by such a raid. Well, I think this is not only a thing of Arab countries, obviously, but I think everything that happened after the war on terror, the so-called war on terror, starting nearly 20 years ago, is trying to really expand and use those legislative means to be able to really harm the lives of so many people. I think the critique of so many legislations, as well as so-called de-radicalization projects, has grown so much within the last years because people really understand that this is very harmful for the society, and it is not something that really prevents what is called terror. Well, I think that's interesting because obviously I was not aware of this before you made me aware of it. And really when I read those Arabic articles, well, my answer is very, very clear. I'm going to sue all of them because they were basically full of lies. So I'm very thankful that you made me aware of that, because this is going to help me definitely fight for my right to be respectfully represented in the media landscape. Well, the operation looks at the so-called the raid that happened was just one point in, I think, something that might take a little bit longer, because even the investigations did not start with the raid, but they started 1.5 years before, and there is the possibility that this really takes a few years. This is at least what most of us fear. Why? Because the state prosecutor, legally speaking, has the right to take up to 3 years to either close the case without any findings, or start raise a case in the court. I don't think that the second thing will happen, because there is substantially nothing with which they could prove that I or somebody else of these people is financing terrorism or any kind of violence. But I think that's kind of a legal measure that can be used, and that's obviously very problematic because it puts us in a kind of a limbo where everybody argues, well, there is a suspicion that this guy is a terrorist, but at the very same time there is no real basis for that, no evidence, right? And keep being in such a limbo for, let's say, 3 years is undoubtedly very, very harmful for all of us, including myself. Well, that was what he claimed. Obviously, the coalition partner, the Green Party, was not so happy with that. So what they did is they proposed a different terminology, which is, now they don't speak about only criminalizing political Islam, but basically saying we want to make every religiously motivated extremism a legal offense. Hence, what they basically did is they widened the terminology. But even if you look into the bill that was proposed, especially its interpretation by the legal bodies in the Austrian government, it's clearly still targeting what is called political Islam. So there is no doubt that the main intention of this new legislation is basically to target what I would call the Muslim civil society, and not really what they deem to be political Islam, which in their interpretation is even worse than jihadism. That's how they put it in the last investigation. Well, there was one MP, one of the longest serving MPs in the Austrian parliament, who in the very first week after that happened published a piece arguing that there were other secret services from other countries like Egypt behind that. And there is a possibility when you look at the texts, it seems this is not really coming from domestic circles, because that has never been the way, let's say, the Austrian secret service has viewed the Muslim Brotherhood. They never saw them as a real threat, and I would also agree with that. So be it that they are just too tiny as a group, and or the other argument that they are not really well organized. And the other thing is that if you look at the texts that were produced that kind of laid the basis for this raid, then you definitely read more of an Egyptian propaganda rather than reading something coming from an expert or let's say some really officials from the Austrian government. But clearly that seems to be like the new trend also that is defining the way how the Austrian, some of the Austrian authorities are following and try to manage Muslims in the country. Well, that's a good question. Look, I mean, at the end of the day, I think we have to be very aware that in Austria there are good people, there are bad people, right? Like in every society. And that's also when you go to the authorities. Obviously, you will find authorities that are very strong under pressure from the leading government. And the current government has a very clear-cut idea of where it wants to go with its Muslim population. So I think what is really needed, one of the things is that the current leading new conservatives under the leadership of Sebastian Kurz, they have to go. As long as they are here, this problem will be existing. I think a change will only be potentially able to happen if they leave the leadership. So let's see where we will be in a few years. Well, I think what we are seeing is different trends within Europe. I mean, the general trend is not really like making me too much optimistic, but we see definitely countries like France or Austria that are very harsh in how it treats its Muslim population. And then we have on the other side countries like, let's say, Spain or Sweden, where things are still much more normal, let's put it this way. So Muslims are not per se and legally speaking discriminated against, like on a legal basis, treated as citizens of a second class, kind of second class citizens, right? So obviously I think what is needed is that those politicians within Europe who see that France and Austria are going in a wrong direction, they have to mobilize against these efforts. And I think what happened after the so-called terrorist attacks, the murder of Samuel Paty in France, and also the murder of innocent people here in Vienna at the beginning of November, we saw that the European Union published a terrorism paper. And obviously, France and Austria, who wanted to include imams talking about Muslims in that paper, they were confronted by a larger group of smaller countries, but still important countries in the European Union, that pushed against that. So I think what is needed currently is that these politicians stay strong and do not allow Austria and France to move the direction of Islam policies in the wrong way.